So, why is forecasting so important to starting a small business? Because the market and the economy move in cycles. If you don't know what cycle you're in, you can't possibly know what cycle you're heading to. So, today I'm going to discuss the cycle that we're in now and then how understanding where we were at a particular time helped me solve one of my biggest clients' problems. All right, so let's talk about it. How do economies work? How do stock markets work? Well, traditionally, a stock market forecasts economies. Today in 2025, we can see that that's not the case, right? I mean, I think anybody can see it. So, by every economic factor known to man, the economy is in the Great Depression too. All right. So, whether that's foreclosures on homes, late payment of homes, new home buyers, repossession of cars, new car loans, new new home loans, unemployment, inflation, income versus inflation. Every factor says that we're in the Great Depression too, yet the stock market and the crypto markets continue to soar. So, what we want to know is how does that correlate to something that has happened in the past? Well, why are these markets soaring? It's really simple. Right now, we have a tech complex. Most people are very familiar with the term industrial complex, right? And then the kings of industry. So, I guess today we would have the kings of tech. Well, they control most of the supply. This isn't new news, right? They're buying up all the homes. They own most of the stock because it's their company, and that's how markets work. All right. So, where can we find that point in history? So, we have a system we're working within. I think everyone can see that they're attempting to head into a crypto and digital system next. How does that transition take place and what does it look like? Well, the closest point in time we can look at would be 1929. So there was actually a stock market crash in 1928 that fell 50%. Most people aren't aware. And then, of course, we have the crash of 29, which was mishandled and led to a 92% drop into 1933. Now, what was different then than now? And then what are the similarities? Well, so here are the glaring similarities. The economy after the crash was the worst it had ever been, or the worst that we know about in this day and age. I'm sure there have been worse times in history, but that's the worst that we can point to. Now, the stock market led to that crash. Why? Well, first, you need to know why the stock market was created. So, the stock market was created because big bankers went out there and they saw this thing called the stock market working. They were no longer lending to small businesses, much like today. So 1915, big banks, they didn't lend to small businesses. There was no way to get a small business really off the ground. So a bunch of guys got together and said, hey, what if we form this thing where we all invest in each other? So as opposed to going to banks and begging for money, we'll sell pieces of our company. We'll call it stock. And in the 20s, what big banks saw, what the establishment saw, was that it began to work. And it was working really, really well. And the people that sit at the top that started a monopoly game that they began hundreds of years ago, maybe thousands of years ago, I have no idea. They started this monopoly game. They owned all the hotels. They owned all the residences, right? All the homes. They collect $1 million every time they pass go. And everybody else was collecting $200 and basically just giving it to them as they circled the board. And that's exactly the way the establishment wants it, right? So you give them your money, they get richer and richer and richer, and they sit in the ivory tower, and they don't have to do a whole heck of a lot in order to accomplish a lifestyle that I think most people probably dream about. So they saw this stock market taking over, and they said, okay, this is a transition of a system. So effectively what happened is they go in with all their big bucks. They buy as much stock as possible. They control the supply because they own most of the stock, much like today, except for today, the establishment already has all of the stock. But again, they control the supply. And then coming into 29, they're ready to transition into a new economy. They simply dump their stock or enough stock to scare people. Then people follow suit, right? They follow suit. They start selling because they're afraid that they're only going to have, 50 cents left when they just had 5 grand or whatever the number was. So they played on people's greed, much like today. How many people are out there telling you, I can teach you how to trade? If you're missing the boat in crypto, you're missing the boat in the stock market, right? We're in that same situation. They play on that because they know what you're trying to do is get by the best way you can. And a 10 to 20% return on your money year after year is so appealing, especially when market starts to go parabolic, which is effectively straight up and not tied to the economy at all, which is the situation they were in back then, the roaring 20s, in the same situation that we're in now. Now, that stock market crashed and it pulled the economy into the pits. What followed that? Well, that was basically the industrial complex. We got into World War II. Everyone, I mean, most men were at war, but the women, the children, and the men that were left behind, they're working in factories. They're not making much money. They're barely getting by. And they're saying how grateful they are that they have these factory jobs, because what they don't realize is the reason they're sitting in those factories is because of what was done to them. You shouldn't be grateful for a solution when the problem was created by the people that you're saying you're grateful to, right? But that's the industrial complex. That led us into the 50s. In the 50s, we had the biggest booming economy this country's ever seen. Maybe not the biggest stock market, maybe not this raging, stock market that was going through the roof, but people spent time with their families, okay? So they were home. Everyone owned a small business. Businesses, for the most part, were not even open on weekends. Vacation were considered very normal. The husband went to work, the wife stayed at home. Now, whether you want to do that or not is up to you. I'm just saying the way it was back then. And you could afford a new house, a couple of cars, vacations, send your kids to school, live a very nice life on this one job. And that one job was your business, your small hardware store, your roofing company, your auto shop, your barber shop, your fitness studio, whatever you want to make it. Okay. Now, how does that tie into today? Well, right now we have a tech complex. Now they're controlling the supply of the stock. So they already have control. That's the biggest difference between 2025 and 1929. They already have control. So they don't need control. What they need to do is transition into the next system. The next system built to keep you right where you're at. Okay. And the same people that own this system own that system. And what they want to do is they want to make that transition smooth, because the one thing that people don't like is a very abrupt, rough transition. So why are they buying up all the supply? Why are they buying all the stock? Why are they buying all the real estate? Well, if the transition is done well enough because they control the supply, we don't need to go into a stock market crash. Okay. As very famously stated by Klaus Schwab, you will own nothing and you will like it. And what he meant by that is you will all incorporate yourself. You will own a small business. Therefore, your home is within your corporation. Your car's within your corporation. Your cell phone's within your corporation. Your computer's within your corporation. You go on a trip. You're going on a company retreat. Okay. I think you get the picture here. And technically, you own nothing because your company does, which then lowers your effective tax rate. Trump just lowered the corporate tax rate. I think it was 25, and now it's down at 17. He did that in 2017. So your effective tax rate is 17%, but on what? Very, very little income, because now everything is held within your business. Okay. So if we can do that, then these big corporate conglomerates and all the guys sitting at the top, they don't have to make home prices nosedive. They don't have to make the stock market nosedive, because what will happen is you will be making more money running your own small business. Look, most of you work for a company. You make that company lots and lots of money, and they throw a few shekels at you for doing your job and doing your job very well, unless you're the CEO. If you're the CEO, you get paid very highly. How do you get paid very highly? Well, that's based on your stock price, which circles you right back to why the stock market and the crypto market are designed the way they are, because the people at the top make all the money based on our greed. And we have to be honest about that, right? You have to be honest. They might be greedy, but you're being greedy because you're trying to get something for nothing. You don't care what the company is or who it is, but you should. And that's why I believe in small businesses, because I do care who the company is. I do care what they believe in, right? So that also has to change. But let's go back to the subject at hand. So we all own these small businesses, and we transition into the next system that they already own. If we choose to, we transition into a system that's digital, right? And those those values, they don't have to drop. So guess who now still owns all of the supply, the stocks, the cars. Carvana does nothing but buy cars now. I have talked to guys that drive for Carvana. They said of every 100 cars, one of them is someone buying, 99 are us selling. So they own the cars, they own the houses, they own the stocks, probably so on and so forth. Okay. If we transition to that smoothly, prices don't have to drop, our income will go up and they'll continue to get wealthier and no one got scared. Now, if that transition doesn't go smoothly, which is also a possibility, then we are in for the biggest storm the world's ever seen because everything's going to nosedive. Why is everything going to nosedive? Well, when the market was originally created, it was created so that if you built a big business, you built a successful business, you had employees that lived very, very well, right? Everyone had health care. That wasn't even a thought. Everyone went on vacation. So you made a lot of lives better. And for doing that, there was like a repayment. People would say, oh, look, his valuation is off. There were no future valuations back then because future valuations are a sham. Future valuations are based on a false number that we're creating today. And I can teach a lot more about that as well, and I will. But back then, it was all about what you actually did. How did you add to GDP? How did you add to employment? How did you make lives better? And when you did that, your stock price went up because everybody loved you and your company and what you were doing for the world. And then you made a lot of money. Today, it has nothing to do with that, right? We can talk about AI and all this stuff at a later date. But for now, let's talk about Elon Musk. He has a robotics company. He said that if he does a good job, he's going to give himself a pay package of $1 trillion. Now, how many people do you think work at that company? Do you think he's adding to GDP? Do you think he's helping unemployment? No. We are now living in an era where it's all about personality and how to prop up price and drive price. He doesn't care if any of those robots work. And in fact, I would go so far as to say he knows that most of it will not work out. But if he makes you believe that it does, and then you buy into that, he gets $1 trillion. All right. So that is where that problem lies today as compared to the 20s. And because we are so far away from that, there's a real risk that we could see a nosedive in everything. All right. But the answer is small businesses. How do we know that? Well, we looked back at 1929. Okay. And we said what came out of the industrial complex was a lot of people slaving away, much like today in Amazon, Factor, Ross, all these distribution centers that people are making $19 an hour working in. It's the same scenario. Okay. Except for back then it was for the war efforts. And what came out of that? Well, small business ownership came out of that. Why? Because at a certain point, people can't take being held down that long. So this is why it is so important to understand market cycles, to understand the economy when you're trying to build a small business. Because if you don't have the wind at your back, small business ownership is tough enough if you have the wind at your back. But if you don't, you're in real trouble. And now you know the scenario that we are in today, how we know the scenario we're in, and we know that small business ownership, and we have only talked about one reason to be a small business owner. I'm going to talk about a dozen reasons, and most of those reasons solve most of the problems that we're talking about today, whether it's political corruption, whether it's money at the top, whether it's corporate America running everything, whether it's them owning your homes. No matter what you want to discuss, small business ownership plays a part in solving those issues, bringing families back together, right? Maybe we could actually be a family again. And then a lot of the social issues that we're dealing with, all of this fighting back and forth and everybody on social media and certain personalities pretending that they care. But the truth is they just want to divide you more. That's why they're always saying this guy's right and this guy's wrong, because I have news for you. At the top, it is not about ethics or morals or beliefs. Power wants more power. Money wants more money. That's it. Okay. Now, if you enjoyed this and you thought that this made a lot of sense, please give me a follow. I have a link to my Promethean business and market forecasting playbook. Basically, it will give you some pointers on what to do. It will talk a lot about how you accomplish forecasting and how you introduce that into owning a small business. So click the link in my bio, give me a follow, like this, please. Send me some comments if you found this interesting. And if you're interested in speaking with me, please reach out via my website, DM me, whatever it is.